This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. You've had this power all along, but please resist the urge to mute me if I go over my allotted time. Thank you in advance. Here's what we got for y'all. In a deeply divided election season, how much do people on one side of the aisle actually know about what folks support on the other side, and vice versa? We examine that gap and the surprising overlap between Democrats and Republicans. Plus, overall COVID-19 vaccine confidence has dropped as companies race to get a vaccine approved, and one demographic group has exhibited more hesitancy than others. But first, here's what you need to know right now. The Department of Justice is going after Google. The antitrust suit filed today accuses Google of stifling competition in the online search market. It comes after a year-long probe by DOJ investigators and a congressional report that says tech giants have too much monopoly power. The move could set off a years-long war between Silicon Valley and Washington.
One way of looking at it is that firms really do have power, and they use the power to entrench themselves and to keep out the rivals, and that hurts consumers. The other way of looking at it, which is the Google way, is to say the firms don't even have power. They're facing huge amounts of competition.
11 states also signed onto the complaint against the search giant. Other states could still join the case or opt to bring their own case against Google. Now, Google denies accusations of unfairly stifling competition. It's faced similar accusations in Europe, where regulators hit Google with $9 billion in fines and look to secure serious changes in the way it offers search and advertising on smartphones. This next and final presidential debate will look and sound a little different than the first, though both candidates will actually be in the same place on the same network come Thursday, so no need to channel flip between town halls. For this debate, a new rule from the Commission on Presidential Debates will introduce a new option for candidates' mics, with the aim of fewer interruptions than what we saw in debate number 1. Here's how that'll work. At the start of each 15-minute segment, candidates will have 2 minutes to answer the initial question. During that time, the opposing candidate's mic will be muted. That will then be followed by a period of open discussion for the remainder of the time. There will be a total of 6 segments. NBC White House correspondent Kristen Welker will moderate the debate. She announced her topics this week, including fighting COVID-19, American families, race in America, climate change, national security, and leadership. Predictably, the president has accused Welker of bias and has openly criticized the rule change, but Trump's campaign manager says he is committed to joining the debate and isn't planning to cancel like last time. A new study out of the United Kingdom is making some serious waves in the medical community. A human challenge program will recruit about 100 healthy volunteers, ages 18 to 30, and deliberately expose them to the coronavirus. Typically, a trial gives a volunteer the vaccine and monitors to see if that person is exposed to the virus in the real world. This study would speed up those results to help with the development of a vaccine. The first phase is set to start in January. To be very clear, the vaccine will not be what gets the patient sick. The volunteers will be quarantined at a London hospital and receive a lab-grown strain of SARS-CoV-2. During the first phase of the trial, scientists hope to learn the minimal amount of the virus needed to cause a measurable infection.
We're basically watching disease in motion right from the very start of inoculation right through to the disease going out of their body. So it gives us an absolute view of what is happening to the human body during an infectious process.
Human challenge trials have been done before to fast-track seasonal flu shots and other vaccines, but this trial will be the first of its kind for COVID-19. As you can imagine, there are already serious ethical concerns being raised since there's no surefire treatment against the virus if one of the patients did take a turn for the worst. The British scientists involved say the participants will be carefully selected to exclude anyone with a characteristic shown to increase COVID-19 severity. So if you're a Republican, where do you think Democrats stand on an issue like, say, gun control? And if you're a Democrat, where do you think most Republicans stand on an issue like immigration? Turns out most of us don't really know as much as we think we know about voters on the other side. And that gap between perception and reality is making our polarized politics seem even more extreme. Zach Toombs breaks down the numbers behind the political perception gap for Newsy's Datalog series.
It seems like politics dominate our lives these days, and yet studies and surveys show that, as voters, we have a very distorted view of people who vote the other way. distorted by social media algorithms, opinion-driven news, and national political divisions that give an exaggerated view of the other side. As a result, we believe our political counterparts have much more extreme views than most of them actually do. This is what researchers call the perception gap of American politics. That's the gap between the views we think other voters hold on the issues and the messy reality of political overlap that really exists. So first off, of course, there are some very real disagreements among the nation's political factions on a range of issues. But study after study shows that most American voters have a very distorted view of voters on the other side. And they're flooded with some pretty extreme language about that other side.
They want to abolish bail, abolish and open up your borders. They want open borders.
We haven't ever had to reckon with the possibility that somebody has ascended to the presidency of the United States to serve the interests of another country rather than our own.
The conclusion can't be avoided. These people actually hate America.
So let's show you what we mean when we say perception gap. The term comes from the nonpartisan group More in Common, which surveyed Democrats and Republicans and asked them to take a guess. What percent of the opposing political party would agree with statements like, most police are bad, or we need more gun control? Then they asked people on each side how they really felt about these things. Turns out we generally think our opponents are a good bit more extreme than they actually are. On average, Republicans in particular have a tough time accurately pinning down the views of their opponents. Now, to put some actual voices to all these numbers, we talked to voters across the political spectrum and asked what they thought about political division and this idea of a perception gap. Okay, well, thanks so much for taking the time.
No problem.
Well, I know the Democratic Party supports open borders. People coming in, even if they're okay or not okay, just, open borders kind of thing. Like Trump says, if you don't have borders, you don't have a country.
So this is from a survey, and what surprises a lot of people is that there's actually more overlap than a lot of people realize.
It looks like, in a sense, that we're not as divided as we really think we are.
What percentage of Republicans would you think agree with this statement?
I'm going to say more than half. I have no idea after that.
But that's actually one of the questions that shows the largest perception gap. When you ask Republicans if they agree with that statement, you get something like 80%.
80% is a little shocking.
I mean, I see some of the jokes where they're coming for your guns. I do believe in the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms and defend your own property. And I don't believe Democrats have that type of philosophy.
And so I'm going to send you a link and actually a graph that shows that's relevant to what we're talking about. Does that surprise you, or does that make sense given what you kind of know about?
It is a little eye-opening. And we do have things that I think Republicans and Democrats that can work together.
Personally, I think that a lot of the problem is because of what social media has kind of done with echo chambers and with giving voices to more extreme groups that then get popularized to the point where people think there's more people who believe those things than there actually is.
Now, an obvious question here is, why are we so often wrong about the views of our political opponents? And to get an answer, we turn to our partners at the survey research group Ipsos. How are you doing? How are you liking your outdoor office?
I'm great. 70 degrees in DC. Can't beat it. So one of the most interesting things from this Newsy Ipsos poll that we did together was that most people say that they're getting their information about the other side from the news media. And that casts a pretty broad net. So that's the news, that's social media. And then far fewer, about 1 in 5, say that they feel like they can turn to somebody from that party, the Democratic or Republican Party. They know someone, and that's how they get their information. Not a small number say that they don't really have a good way to understand the beliefs of other people. What that tells us is that people are turning more to external sources, to the news and to the media, rather than actually knowing someone on the other side of the aisle and getting their views and getting their beliefs firsthand.
We found something interesting when we asked about people avoiding other people who had different political beliefs, and even in some cases cutting them out of their circles.
It says a lot that we have not a small number of Americans admitting that they avoid people with opposing political beliefs. Now, what's interesting though, Zach, is when you take people that usually find their news about members of the opposing party from actual people rather than from the news, they're more apt to believe that common ground can be found. You know, I think now more than ever, fostering those personal connections is more important, but is also harder.
When you're back, the Dodgers take their swing at winning another championship for their city. "1918 had a pandemic and a World Series. MLB figures, why can't we? Here's what's trending. It's the pinnacle of America's pastime, and this year, like everything else, it's a little weird. The Los Angeles Dodgers and the Tampa Bay Rays will battle it out in the World Series starting tonight. It'll be a championship featuring some of the game's biggest stars, including Clayton Kershaw, Mookie Betts, and Randy Arozarena, who are all incredible ball players with really fun names. But of course, COVID-19 will be looming over this World Series, and that will be tough to forget about with mostly empty seats in the stands. The MLB is selling about 11,000 tickets per game in a stadium that holds about 40,000. That's the lowest number of tickets sold for a World Series in more than a century, but it's still a pretty large gathering given the whole, global pandemic and a recent spike in cases in the US. This will also be the first World Series held entirely at one ballpark since 1944 to avoid unnecessary travel. The players, at least, have voiced relief that they were even able to close out this shortened season that's been filled with COVID concerns.
I think it's ultimately a testament to the players for being responsible and making good choices and, doing everything that we had to do to ensure that the season was able to go on.
Join me in feeling a bit worthless here. 14-year-old Anika Chebrolu from Texas is being praised as the top young scientist for her research that could help with COVID-19 treatments.
I was able to develop a molecule which can bind to the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and provide a potential therapy to this deadly COVID-19 disease.
I'm not even gonna pretend to know what half of that means, and that didn't even include the methodology. Chebrolu started off working on ways to combat the flu, but like many of us, her plans changed when the pandemic hit. As a part of being named top scientist, 3M, the company that hosted the competition, awarded Anika 25,000 smackaroos. She says her goal is to use her research and work with scientists to find a cure. My goal is to do anything that'll award me with one lump sum of $25,000. So for those of you who don't know, PragerU is an online video source that exists to push some pretty radical far-right ideas on younger viewers. But it pretends to be a legitimate source of nonpartisan knowledge, hence the news that PragerU is trying to get its content into K-12 schools. Trending on Twitter today, a new report from HuffPost shows how one public school in Ohio assigned PragerU videos with titles like "The Left Ruins Everything" and "Build the Wall" to a 10th grade history class. The school has since pulled the videos from its curriculum. This comes as PragerU launches a new effort to push its content and its hosts, like conservative pundit Ben Shapiro, into more classrooms across the US. We previously reported on how experts see vaccine hesitancy, or the reluctance to actually take an approved vaccine, as a global threat. A worldwide poll found that 1 in 4 adults are not interested in getting an approved vaccine. Not to be the bearer of bad news or anything, but vaccine confidence is declining even more. Newsy's Kat Sandoval did our initial reporting on this topic and tells us how that decline is greater among one demographic group.
Americans' interest in getting a COVID vaccine is declining. A new poll by Stat News and Harris show an 11 percentage point decline in vaccine interest from August to October of this year. In October, they found 58% of Americans are interested in getting a vaccine, compared to 69% in August.
Over the last month and a half or so, there's been increased kind of politicization and polarization in information.
Rob Yakilic of the Harris poll says one of the factors that may have changed public confidence is the FDA's emergency use authorization this summer. Some people viewed it as political.
Many doctors think it is extremely successful, the hydroxychloroquine.
For example, President Trump championed hydroxychloroquine. The FDA approved it for emergency use and then later revoked that authorization after it was proven to be ineffective and possibly unsafe, sowing more distrust. The FDA is, after all, the agency that approves vaccines. When broken down by race, Black Americans saw the largest decline in vaccine confidence, dropping 22 percentage points. Only 43% are interested in getting a COVID vaccine, compared to 65% in August.
Black Americans are much less trusting about information about COVID. There's more of a historical tide of being more disenfranchised from the healthcare system, access to it, care from it, whether it's cardiac or cancer, mental health. You're seeing very similar trends.
Black Americans are twice as likely to die from COVID-19 than their white counterparts. The pandemic magnifies health disparities that already exist pre-COVID and the decades of healthcare distrust felt by Black Americans.
It's a really important kind of healthcare, public health issue, right? So hopefully this data can help inform the conversation and really kind of drive action.
Yakilic says the FDA needs to start building trust if doctors want people to get vaccinated. Actions like getting more representation in clinical trials can help build that trust. Otherwise, this public health crisis will continue. Kat Sandoval, Newsy, Chicago.
I'm going to cleanse the palate with some more Twitter nonsense. I'll be ready for the second half of the show as soon as you're back. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who just won another term, has become a sort of international celebrity. Not to be reductive in summarizing her political career, but she first gained international attention for her response to the Christchurch mosque attack, and then her response to the coronavirus. Newsy's Ben Shamiso spoke to experts in New Zealand about Ardern's rise among global progressives and what other politicians can learn from her.
New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has won a second term by historic margins. Her resounding victory helps cement her unlikely global stardom.
We've never had this much international attention.
We do like it when we're seen to be punching above our weight on the world stage.
How did the 40-year-old leader of a remote island nation become the global darling of progressives? And what can other politicians worldwide learn from her style?
Congratulations, Ms. Ardern.
Ardern has only been Prime Minister for 3 years, but has been a trailblazer from the start. When she took office, she was the world's youngest female leader. Soon after, she became the second head of state to give birth while in office. But above all, her prime ministership has been defined by how she has united her nation of 5 million in times of crisis.
She kind of almost rewrote the book on how to react in a crisis.
Ardern earned international praise for her response to a gunman killing 51 worshippers at 2 mosques last year.
She presented a more progressive way of dealing with terrorism.
To bring with me the message of love and support and grief of the people of New Zealand.
Her popularity surged again when her centre-left government quickly passed legislation banning the deadliest types of firearms. Then the pandemic hit, and Ardern's successful go hard, go early lockdown strategy solidified her domestic and international fame.
People really do feel that their lives have been saved by this Prime Minister.
Besides Ardern's crisis management skills, experts also attribute her success to her warm and down-to-earth personality.
People kind of think of her as an auntie or like a big sister.
Her relatable communication style.
She'll do Facebook Live videos in her pajamas.
Evening, everyone.
And her ability to listen to people who know better.
One thing there that Ardern has been really good at is listening to experts.
However, analysts note that Ardern has been criticized at home for putting style over substance.
When you're trying to be everything to everyone, that does mean that you risk being a bit bland on your policy.
Now, with her new mandate, she faces pressure from her supporters to fulfill promises she has struggled to achieve during her first term.
They want to see issues like inequality, the housing affordability crisis, climate change dealt with.
Ben Chamiso, Newsy.
If you haven't already, reach out to us using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop and tell me what it is you think I can learn from other newscasters. I have a special folder for comments like that. We know that people with underlying or pre-existing medical conditions are at greater risk for severe illness from COVID. We also know that COVID survivors have suffered long-lasting symptoms, including things like fatigue and anxiety. With that in mind, could getting COVID be considered a pre-existing condition? The Supreme Court is gearing up to hear a case that could change how insurers cover these conditions. National reporter Maya Rodriguez explains.
The U.S. remains in the grip of the coronavirus pandemic, with 8 million cases and spiking in multiple states.
There are many, many people not taking this seriously and not playing their part.
Now there are concerns that getting COVID-19 could land you in the same category as someone with diabetes or high blood pressure, having a pre-existing condition.
This has flown under the radar to some extent.
Eric Schneider is with the Commonwealth Fund, which researches health policy. Because COVID-19 can have lingering effects on people who contract it, Schneider says there's a possibility it could be labeled as a pre-existing condition. So who decides that?
The pre-existing condition language really traces to the insurance industry. Really on a case-by-case basis, which diseases, which conditions will actually count.
That hasn't mattered lately because the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, prohibits health insurers from denying people coverage based on pre-existing conditions. But next month, a case before the Supreme Court could get Obamacare thrown out. If that happens, there is no official plan yet from either party to replace it, nor to protect people with pre-existing conditions.
If the Supreme Court undoes that solution, there will definitely be a need for a new solution.
How many could be affected? The Department of Health and Human Services says about 133 million people in the U.S. currently have a pre-existing condition. The Commonwealth Fund looked at how COVID-19 survivors would affect that number, excluding people who already had a pre-existing condition and anyone over the age of 65. Researchers found 3.4 million new people who recovered from the coronavirus could join the ranks of having a pre-existing condition. It's a number growing, they found, by 20,000 a day.
That number is also tied to how well we control the pandemic.
So far, no insurance company has indicated it will add COVID-19 as a potential pre-existing condition. But healthcare policy experts warn it could all come down to what the justices decide about the healthcare law in next month's case. In Washington, I'm Maya Rodriguez.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow for more In the Loop. Same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.